The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Golden Spoon, casting warm patches of light across the polished wooden floors. Jasmine Taylor adjusted her crisp black apron and tucked a stray curl back into her neat bun as she prepared for another day of serving the city's elite. At 26, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied the exhaustion tugging at the corners of her eyes. The restaurant stood as a gleaming jewel in the crown of Harbor Heights, a neighborhood where luxury cars lined the streets and conversations about yacht maintenance were as common as discussions about the weather. For 3 years now, Jasmine had navigated this world with grace, learning to blend into the background when needed and step forward with charm when required. "Good morning, Jasmine," called Miguel, the head chef, his voice carrying from the kitchen. "Ready for another day of pleasing the unpleasable?" Jasmine laughed, the sound brightening her face. "Always am. What's the special today?" "Truffle-infused eggs Benedict with a champagne hollandaise," Miguel replied with a theatrical flourish of his hand. "Fancy enough to justify the $40 price tag." "Perfect for our crowd," Jasmine said, checking her phone one last time before slipping it into her locker. There was an email from her business management professor, confirming their meeting to discuss her thesis project later that week. Education was her escape route, her bridge to a different life. Each shift at the Golden Spoon funded another credit toward her degree. The restaurant manager, Thomas, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, emerged from his office with the day's reservation list. "Heavy hitters coming in today, folks," he announced to the gathering staff. The Whitfield party at noon. Eleanor Whitfield. A collective groan rippled through the group. Eleanor Whitfield's reputation preceded her, the wife of a banking executive known for her charity galas and cutting remarks in equal measure. Whispers about her treatment of service staff circulated among restaurants across the city. "Who's taking that table?" asked Lily, a newer server who had yet to experience Eleanor's particular brand of entitlement. Thomas glanced at his clipboard, then at Jasmine. "It's in your section today." Jasmine nodded, her expression neutral. "Not my first rodeo with Mrs. Whitfield. That's why I'm putting her with you," Thomas said with appreciation in his voice. "You're the only one who can handle her without breaking into tears or breaking plates." As the morning shifted into early afternoon, Jasmine moved between tables with practiced efficiency. She knew exactly how to time each interaction, when to appear with water refills, when to suggest another bottle of wine, when to disappear until needed. It was a dance she had perfected, one that earned her the highest tips in the restaurant despite the occasional customer who looked through her rather than at her. During a rare, quiet moment, Jasmine ducked into the staff bathroom and pulled out a dog-eared flashcard from her pocket. "The 4 components of effective supply chain management," she murmured to herself, reviewing for an upcoming exam. Her double life, student by day, waitress by night and weekend, required constant juggling. But Jasmine had long ago learned that opportunities weren't handed to people like her. They had to be seized between shifts and snatched in stolen moments. The hostess's voice crackled over the staff headset. "Whitfield party of 6 has arrived." Jasmine tucked away her flashcard, straightened her shoulders, and stepped back onto the restaurant floor. Eleanor Whitfield made her entrance like a queen, gracing her subjects with her presence, designer handbag dangling from one arm, cashmere wrap draped artfully around her shoulders despite the warm spring day. 5 women followed in her wake, all with the same polished appearance and air of expectancy. "Mrs. Whitfield, welcome back to the Golden Spoon," the hostess greeted, leading the group toward Jasmine's section. Jasmine observed as Eleanor scanned the dining room, her gaze passing over the carefully arranged flowers and gleaming silverware, with the critical eye of someone accustomed to finding fault. When the party reached their table, the best in the house, with views of both the garden and the interior, Eleanor's eyes flicked over Jasmine without recognition, despite having served her at least a dozen times before. "Good afternoon, ladies. Welcome to the Golden Spoon," Jasmine said, her voice warm and professional. "May I start you with some sparkling water or perhaps our house champagne?" "We'll take a bottle of Veuve Clicquot," Eleanor said without looking up from her menu. "Not the house champagne. I assume you can tell the difference." A faint ripple of amusement passed through Eleanor's friends, but Jasmine's smile remained intact. "Absolutely, Mrs. Whitfield, I'll bring that right out." As Jasmine turned to walk away, she heard Eleanor stage whisper to her companions, "The help here tries so hard. Bless their hearts." The kitchen was a welcome reprieve, a bubble of controlled chaos where social hierarchies held less sway than the ability to work under pressure. Jasmine placed the champagne order with the beverage manager and took a deep breath. "Whitfield table?" asked Rhea, a fellow server who was arranging delicate pastries on a tiered tray. "The one and only," Jasmine confirmed. "I don't know how you do it," Rhea said, shaking her head. "Last time she was at one of my tables, she asked if I was actually from here, and then acted shocked when I didn't have an accent." "It's just a job," Jasmine replied with a shrug, though they both knew it was more complicated than that. 4 more months of tuition and I'm done with my program. I can handle anything for 4 more months. Champagne in an ice bucket. Jasmine returned to Eleanor's table, where the conversation paused briefly upon her arrival. She presented the bottle with practiced elegance, opening it with a subtle pop rather than a showy explosion of foam. "Would anyone like to taste?" she offered. "I think I know what champagne tastes like," Eleanor replied with a dismissive wave. "Just pour." As Jasmine carefully filled the flutes, she noticed a young woman at the table, presumably Eleanor's daughter, looking uncomfortable with her mother's tone. Their eyes met briefly, and the young woman offered a small apologetic smile. Throughout the meal, Jasmine maintained her composure through increasingly demanding requests. The soup was too hot then too cold. The salad needed more dressing than less. A new bread basket was required because someone might have touched a roll they didn't take. During a moment at the server station, Thomas approached her. "You're doing great," he said quietly. "I can take over if you need a break." "I'm fine," Jasmine assured him, arranging dessert menus. Just another table, but they both knew it wasn't just another table. It was a microcosm of a larger world, a world where people like Eleanor Whitfield rarely saw people like Jasmine Taylor as fully human, with dreams and ambitions beyond serving their next meal. As Jasmine refilled water glasses, she overheard snippets of conversation about a charity gala for underprivileged children. The irony wasn't lost on her as Eleanor discussed lifting up the less fortunate while simultaneously treating service workers as invisible. What Eleanor and her friends couldn't see was the life Jasmine built in the hours away from the golden spoon. They didn't know about her near-perfect GPA or the small business incubator she had helped establish in her old neighborhood. They were blind to the late nights spent poring over textbooks after double shifts and the community college classes she taught on financial literacy. In the kitchen, as she waited for the dessert orders to be prepared, Jasmine caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of a stainless steel panel. For a moment she saw herself as they might, just a server in a uniform. Then she straightened her shoulders, remembering who she really was, a woman on the verge of transformation, using one world as a stepping stone to another. "Order up for the Whitfield party," called Miguel, sliding elaborately plated desserts onto the counter. "Extra chocolate sauce on the side as requested, even though it ruins the balance of the dish." "Thanks, Miguel," Jasmine said, arranging the plates on her tray. "Just another day at the Golden Spoon." "Just another day of you being the bigger person," he replied with a knowing nod. Jasmine took a deep breath and pushed through the kitchen doors, balancing both the heavy tray and the weight of expectations as she headed back to Eleanor's table. Little did she know that this ordinary Saturday shift was about to become anything but ordinary. The dessert course at Eleanor's table was winding down when the real trouble began. Jasmine had just finished clearing a few empty plates when Eleanor raised a manicured finger to summon her back. "Excuse me," Eleanor called, her voice carrying across the restaurant in a way that made nearby diners glance over. "There's something wrong with my chocolate mousse." Jasmine approached with a concerned expression. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Mrs. Whitfield. What seems to be the problem?" Eleanor pushed the half-eaten dessert toward Jasmine. "It's too bitter. I specifically asked for extra sweet, not extra dark chocolate." Jasmine paused, knowing with absolute certainty that Eleanor had requested the signature dark chocolate mousse and had made no mention of sweetness. Still, she nodded politely. "I apologize for the misunderstanding. I'd be happy to bring you something else instead. Perhaps the vanilla bean creme brulee? It's one of our sweeter options." Eleanor gave a theatrical sigh that seemed designed for an audience. "I suppose that will have to do, though I've already wasted good calories on this inedible dessert." Her companions tittered appreciatively, except for Eleanor's daughter, who seemed to find the tablecloth suddenly fascinating. "Right away, Mrs. Whitfield," Jasmine said, taking the rejected mousse. As she turned to leave, Eleanor added, "And do try to get it right this time. I know it must be difficult keeping all these orders straight." The comment hung in the air like a slap. Jasmine felt the eyes of nearby diners on her back as she walked to the kitchen, her steps measured and her expression neutral despite the heat rising in her cheeks. In the kitchen, Miguel took one look at her face and the returned mousse and raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, not good enough for Her Majesty?" "Too bitter, apparently," Jasmine replied, keeping her voice light despite the tightness in her throat. "She wants the creme brulee instead." Miguel shook his head as he reached for a ramekin. "That woman would complain about the temperature of ice water." He lowered his voice. "Did she do the thing where she talks extra loud so everyone knows she's dissatisfied?" "Complete with dramatic sigh," Jasmine confirmed. "One day," Miguel said as he sprinkled sugar over the custard, "someone's going to give that woman a reality check, and I hope I'm there to see it." Jasmine smiled but said nothing. Reality checks didn't pay tuition bills, and neither did standing up to customers no matter how tempting it might be. When she returned to the table with the creme brulee, the conversation abruptly halted. Eleanor looked up at Jasmine with the satisfied expression of someone who had just been discussing her. "Here's your creme brulee, Mrs. Whitfield," Jasmine said, placing the dessert on the table, fresh from the kitchen. "Is there anything else I can bring for anyone?" One of Eleanor's friends, a woman with an expensive blonde bob and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light with every movement, spoke up. "Eleanor was just telling us about that awful experience you had at Bellini's last month. The waiter who couldn't understand basic English?" Eleanor nodded, tapping her spoon against the caramelized top of her dessert. "Dreadful service. I told the manager they really need to be more selective about who they hire. I mean, if you can't communicate properly, you shouldn't be in a service position, should you?" The question was directed at Jasmine, who found herself suddenly pulled into their conversation against her will. The implication was clear. Eleanor was creating a us versus them scenario, assuming Jasmine would side with us despite being very much categorized as them in Eleanor's worldview. "I believe good service comes in many accents," Jasmine replied diplomatically. "Is there anything else I can bring for the table?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly at the non-answer. She broke through the caramelized sugar with unnecessary force. "Actually, yes. This champagne has gotten warm. We need a fresh bottle, properly chilled this time." Jasmine glanced at the bottle in the ice bucket, which was still half full and perfectly cold. "Of course, I'll bring a new bottle right away." As she walked away, she heard Eleanor say to her companions, "You have to be firm with them or they walk all over you." The lunch service continued this way, with Eleanor finding fault with nearly everything. The water wasn't refilled quickly enough. The check was taking too long. The air conditioning was too strong, then too weak. The restaurant had filled to capacity, and Jasmine was now juggling Eleanor's demands with those of her other tables. A young couple celebrating an anniversary, a group of business people discussing contracts over wine, a family with well-behaved children carefully using their napkins. None of them made special requests or complained about imaginary problems. Jasmine brought the fresh champagne to Eleanor's table, opening and pouring it with the same care as the first bottle. As she did, Eleanor's phone rang and she answered it while Jasmine was mid-pour. "Yes, Richard, I'm still at lunch," Eleanor said loudly into the phone. "The service is glacial as usual. I don't know why we keep coming here except that there's nowhere better in this neighborhood." She waved her hand dismissively at Jasmine without looking at her. "No, you're not interrupting anything important," Jasmine continued pouring, pretending not to hear. One of Eleanor's friends, seemingly embarrassed, mouthed, "Sorry," when their eyes met. Jasmine gave a small smile in return. These small moments of humanity from others made the job bearable. After finishing her call, Eleanor turned her attention to a small stain on the tablecloth that hadn't been there before her arrival. "Excuse me," she called to Jasmine, who was helping another table nearby. "This tablecloth is soiled. I need you to change it immediately." Jasmine excused herself from the other customers and approached Eleanor's table. "I'd be happy to refresh your table, Mrs. Whitfield, though it might take a few minutes to reset everything." "Well, we can hardly be expected to dine with dirty linens," Eleanor replied, gesturing to the barely noticeable mark that appeared to be from a drop of champagne. "Of course not," Jasmine agreed. "If you'll give me just a moment, I'll arrange for fresh linens." She spoke with Thomas, who helped her quickly reset another table nearby. They transferred Eleanor's party to the new table, a process that Eleanor complained took an eternity, despite being completed in under 5 minutes. Once settled at the new table, Eleanor seemed to find her stride in creating problems. The lighting was unflattering. The chairs were uncomfortable. The new table was too close to the kitchen. Throughout it all, Jasmine maintained her composure, addressing each complaint with professional courtesy. Other servers shot her sympathetic glances as they passed. Regulars who knew both Jasmine and Eleanor's reputations watched the interaction with interest, some whispering behind menus. "I don't know how you do it," Lily whispered to Jasmine as they passed each other at the server station. "I would have lost it by now." "Just think of the tip," Jasmine replied with a wry smile. Though they both knew that people like Eleanor rarely tipped well, regardless of service quality. The meal was finally winding down. Jasmine brought the check in a leather folder, placing it discreetly on the table. "No rush at all. Thank you for dining with us today." Eleanor barely glanced at her as she reached for the folder. She opened it, looked at the total, and made a show of examining each item on the bill. "There's a mistake here," she announced loudly. "We were charged for both champagne bottles, but the second one was to replace the first because it was warm." Jasmine knew this wasn't true. The first bottle had been consumed entirely before the second was requested, and both were properly chilled. "I'd be happy to check on that for you," Jasmine said, reaching for the bill. "No need," Eleanor replied, sliding a credit card into the folder. "Just remove the charge for the second bottle, and I expect the dessert I couldn't eat to be removed as well." Jasmine took the folder. "I'll speak with my manager about the adjustments." In the back office, Thomas looked over the bill and sighed. "Just comp the champagne and dessert. It's not worth the scene she'll make." "It's not fair," Jasmine said quietly. She drank both bottles. "The kitchen made both desserts." "I know," Thomas agreed. "But she's friends with the owner's wife. Some battles aren't worth fighting." Jasmine processed the adjusted bill and returned to the table. Eleanor didn't even look at the new total before signing, adding a tip that amounted to less than 10% of even the reduced total. As the group prepared to leave, Eleanor stood and smoothed her expensive dress. She turned to her friends but spoke loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "The service in this place has really gone downhill. I remember when they had proper staff who understood quality." The comment hung in the air, its target unmistakable. Several diners looked uncomfortable. Jasmine stood nearby, waiting to thank them for their visit as was customary. Eleanor turned to Jasmine with a cold smile. "We won't be needing anything else," she said, dismissing her as one might wave away an insect. It was then that Eleanor's designer handbag caught on the edge of her water glass, tipping it over. Water poured across the table and directly into her daughter's lap, who jumped up with a startled cry. "Look what you've done," Eleanor snapped, turning on Jasmine as if she had somehow caused the accident from several feet away. And in that moment, something shifted in the restaurant's atmosphere. The tension that had been building all afternoon crackled like static electricity before a storm. Jasmine could feel it. This was no longer about water glasses or champagne temperatures or chocolate mousse. This was about power, about respect, about humanity. Eleanor was staring at her, waiting for an apology for something she hadn't done, in front of a restaurant full of people who had watched her endure one indignity after another with grace. And Jasmine, who had spent years being invisible when it suited others and a target when it didn't, made a decision. The spilled water dripped steadily off the edge of the table, creating a small puddle on the polished floor. Eleanor's daughter dabbed at her wet dress with a napkin, her face flushed with embarrassment, while Eleanor stood with her finger pointed directly at Jasmine. "This is completely unacceptable," Eleanor said, her voice rising with each word. "Look at what you've done to my daughter's dress. It's silk, for heaven's sake." Jasmine glanced at the young woman who looked mortified, not by her wet dress but by her mother's behavior. Several nearby diners had stopped eating to watch the scene unfold. The restaurant had grown oddly quiet, the normal clinking of silverware and hum of conversation fading away. "Mrs. Whitfield," Jasmine began calmly, "I was standing over here when the glass tipped. I'm very sorry about your daughter's dress, though, and I'd be happy to bring some club soda for the stain." Eleanor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you suggesting I knocked over the water? That I don't know what I saw with my own eyes?" The woman's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them touched Eleanor's arm gently. "Ellie, maybe we should just go. It's only water." But Eleanor shook off her friend's hand. 3 hours of building frustration had found its release point, and she wasn't about to let go. No, Diane. This is exactly the problem with service these days. No accountability. No standards. She turned to face the restaurant at large, clearly enjoying having an audience for her performance. When I was growing up, people in service positions knew their place. They were grateful for their jobs. They didn't talk back or make excuses. The words hung in the air like a noxious cloud. Even Eleanor's friends looked uncomfortable now. Her daughter had taken several steps back, as if trying to physically distance herself from her mother's words. Thomas, sensing trouble, emerged from the back and approached with a professional smile. "Is everything all right here, Mrs. Whitfield?" Eleanor turned her sharp gaze to him. "No, everything is not all right. Your waitress," she gestured dismissively toward Jasmine without looking at her, "knocked over a glass of water onto my daughter and then had the nerve to deny it. And it's not the first problem we've had with her service today." Thomas glanced at Jasmine, who maintained her composed expression, despite the unfair accusation. He had known her long enough to trust her implicitly. "I'm very sorry about the accident, Mrs. Whitfield. We'll certainly take care of any cleaning bills for your daughter's dress. Perhaps I can offer complimentary desserts for your next visit." But Eleanor wasn't interested in resolution. She was interested in escalation. "Next visit?" She gave a harsh laugh. "There won't be a next visit if this is the kind of staff you employ. I want to speak to the owner. Gregory Williams and I serve on 3 charity boards together. I'm sure he'd be interested to know the quality of people working in his establishment." At the words "quality of people," something shifted in the atmosphere of the restaurant. It wasn't just about spilled water anymore. It wasn't even about poor service. The implication in Eleanor's tone was unmistakable. An older gentleman at a nearby table cleared his throat loudly and set down his fork. A woman by the window whispered something to her companion while glancing disapprovingly at Eleanor. Jasmine felt a strange calm wash over her. 3 years of biting her tongue, of smiling through thinly veiled insults, of being treated as less than human by people who didn't know the first thing about her life. It all crystallized in this moment. "Mrs. Whitfield," Jasmine said, her voice clear and steady, "I understand you're upset about the water spill. Accidents happen in restaurants every day and we're always happy to help clean up. But I want to be very clear that I was standing here several feet away when your handbag caught the glass." Eleanor's face flushed with anger. "How dare you contradict me? Do you know who I am in this community?" "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Whitfield," Jasmine replied, maintaining her professional tone despite the tension crackling in the air. Eleanor turned to Thomas, her voice rising even higher. "I want her fired immediately. I won't be spoken to this way by the help." The word help echoed in the now silent restaurant. Even the kitchen staff had paused to watch through the service window. Miguel stood with a spatula frozen in midair, his expression a mixture of concern and anticipation. Thomas looked deeply uncomfortable, caught between supporting his employee and placating an influential customer. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm sure we can resolve this without—" But Eleanor cut him off with a raised hand. "No. Either she goes or I call Gregory right now and tell him what kind of establishment he's running." She pulled out her phone for emphasis, waving it like a weapon. "And I'll be sure to mention it at the next Chamber of Commerce meeting, and to everyone at the country club." The threat hung in the air. Jasmine could see Thomas calculating the potential damage to the restaurant's reputation. It wasn't fair to put him in this position, she knew. For all his kindness, he had a business to run and staff who depended on their jobs. "It's all right, Thomas," Jasmine said quietly. "I can handle this." Eleanor smirked, clearly believing she'd won. Well, at least she knows when she's beaten. Some people just aren't cut out for work that requires class and professionalism. The words were meant to wound, to diminish, to put Jasmine in her place. For a moment, the restaurant held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Jasmine took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. She looked directly at Eleanor, no longer the invisible server, but a woman standing her ground. "Mrs. Whitfield," she began, her voice clear enough to carry throughout the restaurant without shouting. "I've served you on 15 separate occasions over the past 3 years. I've remembered that you prefer your salad dressing on the side, that you're allergic to shellfish, and that you take your coffee with 1 sugar and a splash of cream, not milk." Eleanor blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by this unexpected response. In those 3 years, Jasmine continued. You've never remembered my name. You've never looked me in the eye when speaking to me. You've never said please or thank you, and that's your choice. But it says more about you than it does about me. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed, her prepared script suddenly useless in the face of this calm recitation of facts. As for class and professionalism, Jasmine continued, still maintaining her measured tone, my grandmother taught me that those qualities are shown in how you treat people, especially people you think can't do anything for you in return. The restaurant was utterly silent now. Even the kitchen had gone quiet, with staff edging closer to the door to hear. Eleanor's face darkened. How dare you lecture me about class? Do you have any idea who you're talking to? My husband could buy and sell this entire restaurant without blinking. We donate more to charity each year than you'll make in a lifetime. She turned to her friends for support but found their expressions strangely guarded. Her daughter had her face in her hands. I know exactly who I'm talking to, Mrs. Whitfield, Jasmine replied. The question is, do you know who you're talking to? Eleanor gave a dismissive laugh. Oh, enlighten me, please. Who exactly do you think you are? The moment hung in the air like a suspended drop of water, teetering on the edge before falling. Jasmine could back down, apologize, return to the role Eleanor had assigned her. It would be easier, safer. But something inside her refused to bend any further. I am Jasmine Taylor, she said simply. I'm working my way through business school with a 3.9 GPA. I teach financial literacy classes twice a week in my old neighborhood. I started a small business incubator that's helped launch 3 community enterprises, and yes, I also happen to be the person who brings your salad dressing on the side. The revelation landed in the silent restaurant like a thunderclap. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing her face before she masked it. Am I supposed to be impressed by that? Plenty of people go to community college, Eleanor said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Jasmine shook her head. Not community college, Mrs. Whitfield. Havenbrook Business School. The same institution where your foundation hosted the Young Entrepreneurs Awards last fall. Eleanor's face paled slightly. Havenbrook was one of the top business schools in the region, known for its competitive admissions and prestigious alumni network. And you might remember, Jasmine continued, because I certainly do, that I was one of the award presenters that evening. We actually shook hands. You told me my speech was inspiring. You just didn't recognize me in this uniform. A gasp came from somewhere in the restaurant. Eleanor's friends were now staring at Jasmine with new interest, while Eleanor herself seemed to be mentally replaying the event, her expression shifting as realization dawned. That's not possible, Eleanor stammered, but the conviction had drained from her voice. I have a photograph of us together, Jasmine said simply. You're wearing a blue gown with silver detailing. You mentioned your son had just started at Princeton. You asked me to send you information about my community development project. Each detail landed like a pebble, creating ripples across Eleanor's carefully maintained facade. Her friends were now looking at her with questions in their eyes. Her daughter had emerged from behind her hands, watching the scene with newfound interest. The power dynamic that Eleanor had taken for granted was shifting beneath her feet like sand, and she was struggling to find stable footing. The restaurant watched in rapt silence, the tension building toward something no one could yet name. The silence in the restaurant seemed to stretch for ages, though in reality only seconds had passed. Eleanor's face had gone through a remarkable transformation, from righteous anger to confusion, then to dawning recognition, and finally settling on something that looked uncomfortably like panic. I meet so many people at those events, she said, her voice no longer commanding the room but instead sounding thin and uncertain. You can't expect me to remember everyone. Jasmine nodded, her expression calm. Of course not, Mrs. Whitfield, no one expects that. Just as no one would expect you to remember the name of your server, even after 15 visits. She paused, letting the point sink in. But there's a difference between not remembering someone and treating them as if they're beneath you. Eleanor's daughter, who had been watching the exchange with growing interest, suddenly spoke up. Mom, is she the one who did that amazing presentation about the microloan program? The one you told Dad we should consider funding? Eleanor shot her daughter a silencing look, but it was too late. The question hung in the air, further confirming Jasmine's story. One of Eleanor's friends leaned forward, examining Jasmine more carefully now. Wait, I was at that ceremony too. You're the young woman who started that program helping single mothers launch home businesses, aren't you? Jasmine nodded slightly. Yes, that's one of my projects. The woman turned to Eleanor with raised eyebrows. Ellie, you raved about her speech for days afterward. You said she was exactly the kind of driven young person your foundation should be supporting. Eleanor's face flushed deep red. She opened her mouth to speak but seemed unable to find words that would salvage the situation. Thomas, who had been watching the interaction with increasing amazement, stepped forward. Mrs. Whitfield, perhaps we could discuss this privately in my office. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, an opportunity for Eleanor to retreat from the public spectacle she herself had created. For a moment it seemed she might take it. But pride is a powerful thing, especially when it's been built on a foundation of unchallenged superiority. Eleanor straightened her designer jacket and found her voice again. This is ridiculous. I don't have to stand here and be lectured by waitstaff. Regardless of what scholarships or charity projects they might have, the fact remains that the service today was substandard, and now I'm being publicly disrespected. She turned to Thomas. I still expect this to be addressed. I'm a long-standing patron of this establishment. Thomas looked uncomfortable, caught between the traditional expectation that the customer is always right, and the clear evidence that in this case, the customer was demonstrably wrong. Before he could respond, a deep voice spoke from across the restaurant. Excuse me. Heads turned toward a distinguished-looking man in his 60s who had risen from his table. He approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. I couldn't help overhearing this conversation, he said. I'm David Chen, Dean of the Business School at Havenbrook. Jasmine's eyes widened slightly in surprise. She had seen Dean Chen around campus and at official events, of course, but had never directly interacted with him. Ms. Taylor, he said, nodding respectfully to Jasmine, I recognize you from the Honors Board. Your work on community economic development has been quite impressive. Then he turned to Eleanor. Mrs. Whitfield, I believe we've met at several fundraising events. Your foundation's support of education initiatives has been generous. Eleanor straightened, clearly relieved to be addressed with the deference she felt she deserved. Yes, Dean Chen. The Whitfield Foundation is committed to educational excellence. Dean Chen nodded politely. Indeed. Which is why I'm particularly disappointed by what I've witnessed today. Eleanor's smile froze. Ms. Taylor represents the very values our institution strives to instill in all our students: perseverance, dignity, and excellence in the face of challenges. He glanced at Jasmine with genuine respect. Working full-time while maintaining honor standing is no small achievement. He turned back to Eleanor. I would hope that someone so invested in developing young talent would recognize those qualities, regardless of the setting in which they're displayed. The restaurant had gone utterly silent again. Even the kitchen staff had abandoned any pretense of working and were openly watching through the service window. Eleanor's friends were now staring at her with expressions ranging from embarrassment to disapproval. Her daughter looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. There's been a misunderstanding, Eleanor stammered. I had no idea. That's precisely the point, isn't it? Jasmine said quietly. You had no idea because you never bothered to look beyond the uniform. There was no anger in her voice, no desire to humiliate or shame. Just a simple statement of truth that resonated throughout the restaurant. Every person who serves your food, cleans your house, drives your car, each one has their own story, their own dreams, their own value that has nothing to do with how useful they are to you in the moment. Another voice joined the conversation, an elderly woman seated near the window. Well said, young lady. She turned to Eleanor with a pointed stare. I've been coming to this restaurant for 30 years, and that young woman has always provided exemplary service. I've watched her study between tables. I've seen her help elderly patrons to their cars in the rain. Perhaps if you spent more time observing others and less time expecting to be observed, you'd have noticed these things too. Eleanor looked around the restaurant, suddenly realizing that the audience she had been playing to had turned against her. The performance she had scripted, wealthy patron righteously disciplining incompetent server, had transformed into something entirely different. I think, she said stiffly, reaching for her purse, that we should be going. Her friends nodded quickly, eager to escape the uncomfortable situation. They began gathering their things, avoiding eye contact with everyone around them. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor's daughter hesitated, then stepped toward Jasmine. "I'm really sorry," she said quietly. "Your program for helping women start businesses, is there a website where I could learn more about it? I'm studying social entrepreneurship at college, and it sounds like exactly the kind of initiative I'd like to support." Jasmine smiled, genuine warmth replacing the professional mask she had worn all afternoon. "Of course." She took a business card from her apron pocket and handed it to the young woman. "My email and the program website are both on there. I'd be happy to talk with you about it." The young woman tucked the card carefully into her wallet, offering Jasmine a grateful smile before hurrying to catch up with her mother, who was already making her way to the exit with as much dignity as she could muster. As the group disappeared through the front door, the restaurant remained silent for a beat longer, then erupted into conversations. Several nearby diners caught Jasmine's eye and nodded approvingly. Thomas touched her shoulder gently. "Are you okay?" Jasmine took a deep breath, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to fade. "I'm fine. I'm sorry if I caused a scene." Thomas shook his head firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for." "Nothing at all." From across the room, Dean Chen approached again. "Ms. Taylor, I hope I didn't overstep by involving myself in that situation." "Not at all, Dean Chen. Thank you for your support." He smiled. "No thanks necessary. In fact, I've been hoping to speak with you. We're establishing a new center for community economic development at Havenbrook, and we're looking for someone to lead the practical training components. Based on your work, you'd be an ideal candidate. Would you be interested in discussing it?" Jasmine blinked in surprise. Yes, absolutely. That sounds like an amazing opportunity." "Excellent. I'll have my assistant reach out to schedule a meeting." He handed her his card. "And for what it's worth, I was tremendously impressed by how you handled yourself today. That kind of grace under pressure is a quality we value highly at Havenbrook." As Dean Chen returned to his table, Jasmine felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Miguel standing there, having finally emerged from the kitchen. "That," he said with undisguised admiration, "was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in this restaurant. And I've been cooking here for 12 years. Jasmine laughed, the tension of the afternoon finally breaking. "I probably shouldn't have said all that. It wasn't very professional." "Professional?" Miguel raised his eyebrows. "That was the most professional thing I've ever seen. You stood up for yourself without losing your cool or saying anything you shouldn't have. You were honest without being cruel." He shook his head in wonder. "They should teach a class on that." "Maybe they will," Thomas said with a smile, gesturing toward Dean Chen's card in Jasmine's hand. The three of them shared a laugh, and for the first time that day, Jasmine felt truly seen in the Golden Spoon. Not as a server, not as a student, but as herself, a whole person worthy of respect regardless of the uniform she wore. As she returned to her duties, Jasmine noticed something unusual. Customers who had witnessed the scene were looking at her differently, making eye contact, smiling, engaging in brief conversations as she served them. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing them to see the person behind the professional role for the first time. And perhaps most surprisingly, Jasmine found herself standing a little straighter, speaking a little more freely, no longer carefully modulating every word and gesture to be invisible when convenient and useful when needed. One small confrontation hadn't changed the world. Eleanor Whitfield would likely continue treating service workers as beneath her notice. Many of the customers who had witnessed today's events would eventually forget and fall back into old patterns. But something had shifted, nevertheless. A small crack in a system that too often rendered some people visible and others invisible based on arbitrary distinctions of wealth, status, and power. As Jasmine refilled water glasses at a nearby table, an older gentleman looked up at her and asked, "How's your business program going? Sounds like you're doing remarkable work." It was a simple question, the kind that recognized her as a person with a life beyond the restaurant walls. But in that moment, it felt like the beginning of something important. 6 months later, Jasmine stood in front of the mirror in her new apartment, adjusting the collar of her blazer. The morning light streamed through windows much larger than those in her old place, highlighting the simple but tasteful furnishings she'd carefully selected over the past few weeks. On her desk sat a framed diploma, her business degree from Havenbrook, completed with honors. Beside it was a small plaque reading, Community Leader Award from the city's Chamber of Commerce, presented just 2 weeks ago. Life had changed dramatically since that Saturday afternoon at the Golden Spoon. Not overnight, real change rarely happens that way, but steadily, in ways both small and profound. "You ready?" called a voice from the kitchen. Miguel appeared in the doorway holding a travel mug of coffee. Though no longer co-workers, they had maintained their friendship, with Miguel often testing new recipes on Jasmine when she needed a break from her increasingly busy schedule. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jasmine replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "First day jitters, I guess," Miguel grinned. "The woman who stood up to Eleanor Whitfield in front of a packed restaurant is nervous?" "I don't believe it," Jasmine laughed. "That was different. That was just standing up for myself. Today I'm responsible for an entire program and the people who are counting on it. And you're going to be amazing," Miguel assured her. "Those women are lucky to have you." The women were the first cohort of participants in the Havenbrook Community Business Initiative. 15 aspiring entrepreneurs from underserved neighborhoods who would spend the next year learning to develop and launch their own small businesses. As Director of Community Programs, Jasmine was responsible for overseeing their training, connecting them with mentors, and helping secure microfinancing for their ventures. It was a job that perfectly combined her education, experience, and passion. A job that might never have materialized if not for Dean Chen witnessing her interaction with Eleanor that day. "I should get going," Jasmine said, checking her watch. "I want to get there early to make sure everything's set up properly." Miguel gave her a quick hug. "Knock 'em dead. And don't forget, celebration dinner at my place tonight. Rhea and Thomas are coming too." "Wouldn't miss it," Jasmine promised, grabbing her bag and heading for the door. Outside, the city was waking up, painted in the golden light of early morning. Jasmine took a moment to appreciate the crisp air, the sense of possibility that seemed to hover around her these days. Her new apartment was just a 15-minute walk from Havenbrook's downtown campus, a small luxury she still wasn't used to after years of long bus commutes. As she walked, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. In the weeks following the confrontation at the Golden Spoon, word had spread, first through the restaurant community, then wider as someone who had witnessed the exchange posted about it on social media. Though no names were mentioned in the post, the story resonated with people, a David and Goliath tale of dignity prevailing over entitlement. For Jasmine, the most immediate change had been at the restaurant itself. Customers began to really see her as a person. Conversations extended beyond food orders to genuine interest in her studies and community work. Tips improved, making it easier to cover her final tuition payments. Some regular patrons even became donors to her community initiatives after learning about them. Thomas had given her more flexible scheduling to accommodate her meetings with Dean Chen about the new position. The restaurant owner, far from being upset about the Eleanor incident as she had feared, had actually taken Jasmine aside to apologize for not standing up for her staff more firmly in the past. "You taught us all something that day," he had told her, "including me." But the most surprising development had come 3 weeks after the incident, when Eleanor's daughter had shown up at the restaurant alone, asking to speak with Jasmine. Over coffee during Jasmine's break, the young woman, Catherine, had explained that her mother's behavior that day had forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about how she'd been raised. "I've always been uncomfortable with how she treats people in service positions," Catherine had admitted. "But I never had the courage to really call her on it. Seeing you stand up to her that day, it changed something for me." Catherine had gone on to explain that she'd been researching Jasmine's microloan program and wanted to get involved, despite her mother's disapproval. "I have a trust fund that comes under my control in 2 months when I turn 25, she had explained. "I want to use part of it to support programs like yours. Not as some guilt offering, but because I genuinely believe in what you're doing." That conversation had led to Catherine becoming the first donor to the newly established Havenbrook Community Business Initiative, a fact her mother had been less than thrilled about when she discovered it. According to Catherine's amused reports during their now regular coffee meetings, Eleanor herself had never returned to the Golden Spoon, nor had she directly contacted Jasmine. But through the small world network of university fundraising, Jasmine had heard that Eleanor had become noticeably more subdued at charity events, and had even been spotted thanking service staff at the last Havenbrook fundraising gala. Small changes, perhaps, but meaningful ones. Jasmine's thoughts were interrupted as she approached the Havenbrook campus, its brick buildings glowing in the morning light. She made her way to the newly renovated Wilson Hall, where the Community Business Initiative was housed. As she climbed the steps, she spotted a familiar face, Dean Chen, waiting by the entrance with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might appreciate some reinforcements on your first day," he said, handing her one of the cups. "Even though I suspect Miguel has already supplied you." Jasmine smiled, accepting the second coffee. "Thank you, and not just for the coffee." Dean Chen nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. "You earned this position, Ms. Taylor. All I did was notice talent that was already there." They walked together through the building to a bright conference room where tables had been arranged in a semicircle. Name placards sat at each place, along with folders containing the program materials Jasmine had spent weeks preparing. "Nervous?" Dean Chen asked as they surveyed the room. "A little," Jasmine admitted. "I want to get this right. These women are taking a big leap of faith. So did you once," he reminded her. "And look how that turned out." The sound of voices in the hallway signaled the arrival of the program participants. Jasmine straightened her shoulders and walked to the door to greet them. They entered one by one, 15 women of varying ages, backgrounds, and experiences, united by their determination to create something of their own. Some looked confident, others apprehensive, all curious about the program that had selected them from hundreds of applicants. Among them was Ria's cousin, who had applied after hearing about the initiative from Jasmine during a shift at the Golden Spoon. There was the owner of a small home bakery looking to expand, a seamstress hoping to launch an alteration business, a former teacher with dreams of opening an after-school program. Each woman carried her own story, her own reasons for being there, and each Jasmine knew had faced her own version of the Eleanor Whitfields of the world. People who had looked at them and seen only what they could provide, not who they could become. As the last participant took her seat, Jasmine moved to the front of the room. The nervousness she had felt earlier melted away as she looked at the expectant faces before her. This moment, this opportunity to help others build something meaningful, was why she had worked so hard all these years. "Welcome to the Havenbrook Community Business Initiative," she began, her voice clear and confident. "My name is Jasmine Taylor, and like many of you, my journey to this room wasn't a straight line." She paused, making eye contact with several of the women. "We all have stories about the obstacles we've faced, the people who underestimated us, the systems that weren't designed with us in mind, the moments when we had to choose between speaking up or staying silent." Nods of recognition rippled through the group. "Those stories matter," Jasmine continued. "They've shaped who we are, but they don't define what we can become or what we can build together." For the next hour, Jasmine outlined the program, the workshops, the mentorships, the funding opportunities. As the women began to ask questions and share their ideas, the room filled with energy and possibility. During a mid-morning break, Jasmine stepped into the hallway to check her messages. There was a text from Thomas. "The Golden Spoon isn't the same without you, but we're all so proud. Go change the world, one business plan at a time." She smiled, typing back a quick thank you. As she put her phone away, she noticed Dean Chen watching the interaction in the conference room, where the women had naturally formed small groups and were already exchanging contact information and business ideas. "You've created something special here," he said as Jasmine rejoined him. "And this is just the beginning." Jasmine nodded, taking in the scene before her. "The beginning for them," she agreed. "But for me, I think this started a long time ago." Her mind flashed briefly to that Saturday at the Golden Spoon, the tension, the confrontation, the moment of decision. One small choice to stand her ground had opened doors she hadn't even known existed. "You know," Dean Chen said thoughtfully, "we often talk about success as if it's something you achieve on your own, through determination, hard work, talent. And those things matter. But sometimes success is also about being seen, really seen by the right person at the right moment. And sometimes," Jasmine added, "it's about refusing to be unseen when someone tries to make you invisible." A timer chimed, signaling the end of the break. As the women returned to their seats, their faces eager and determined, Jasmine took her place at the front of the room once more. This was not where she had expected to be 6 months ago. Life rarely followed the paths we imagined for ourselves, but standing there about to help 15 women begin journeys of their own, Jasmine felt a sense of rightness, as if all the pieces of her life had been leading to this moment. "All right, ladies," she said with a smile. "Let's talk about turning your dreams into business plans. Who wants to go first?" As hands raised around the room, Jasmine thought about Eleanor Whitfield and felt an unexpected sense of gratitude. Some teachers appear in our lives to show us what to become. Others unwittingly show us what we never want to be. Either way, the lessons change us if we're brave enough to learn them.